Good afternoon. I wanted to add in another video, even though I've gone over some of the beginning, like paintbrush, paper, and paint kind of supplies things. And I tried to simplify it as much as possible, but the truth is, all of it can be very in depth in a lot of different ways. You can see here, I have a lot of different palettes, and it's because I mostly work from, well, I only work from tube paints. I primarily use Daniel Smith watercolors and a few other brands mixed in, but I will put them into my own little half pans and make my own palettes from that. So I start with tubes and then I make them into collections like so. And I also wanted to point out another brand that I really love. I think I hinted on it quickly, is the Art Toolkit. And I love them because they are so small and compact, and you can carry your paint anywhere, and you can carry a lot of colors anywhere. Not that I think that you need a million colors, but just having what you want, what you need, is always nice. I've gotten to the point where I really know the colors I like to always have on hand, and that's what this is here. And I've also mentioned I have all of these paints available to purchase on my website in half pans. So I will pour half pans for you and put them into these little tins. So if you have some colors and you want to add to them, or if you just kind of want to start with some of my favorites here, I will pour them and I will write on the pan and get these to you as soon as they're set up and dry enough that they're not going to make a huge mess in the mail. So these are in the process of drying, and then they'll go nicely in here. I put a little bit of sticky tack on the bottom, and you can either work from them from this tin. I'm going to clean up a little bit more, or this can be the starting point where you can buy a tin like this. These are sold as selling as 12 half pans, but usually you can fit more in the center. So if you want to just start off with 12, you can fit more in the center, and you actually can usually fit 7 across. So I've got 21, I think, in here, or 20, something close to that. So there's a lot of different options. Kind of start with this, and then a 10 this size is typically around $15-$20. So it starts to add up. So you can see how that can become, doing professional watercolors, professional grade watercolors, can become really expensive really fast. This palette alone without any paint in it is around $40 for this tiny one. It's one of my favorites. There's no plastic involved. They're magnetic. But see how thin they are? They're kind of wafer thin. But if you have the tubes of paint to refill them, I don't have to refill them that often, and I work from it a lot. But that's a really, really great option as well if you want to spend the money and do that. I was going to think there are a few other palettes and things that I've been seeing recently that I think are kind of exciting, and I'll put some links to them, but I can't speak for using them. I just think that they're kind of nice ideas. There's one that's in cork, like reused, I think repurposed wine corks they've made a palette out of, but they also have very thin paints in them similar to this. But when you use it up, then you can kind of compost it, and it's not a horrible waste on the planet. But these are basically my favorite colors in my palette. These are the ones that I have sometimes, but I typically don't use them as much. But in This Is My Everything palette, I do want to rearrange it. But this I'm pretty sure everything on this page is in this palette. And maybe then some. Yeah. I don't have on here Naples Yellow, but I also have Naples Yellow, Buff Titanium, Hansa Yellow Medium. This is actually a Naples Yellow Warm from Lucas. Lucas makes great paints. They are sold only through Jerry's Artorama. Permanent Orange, Pyrrole Scarlet. This is the Coral. I don't have a ton of it left. I'm just going to use that one up and be done with it. Quinacridone Magenta, Cerulean Blue Chromium, Ultramarine Blue. Whoop, no, that was Phthalo Blue. And then there's Ultramarine Blue. And then there is Indanthrone, Indigo, Pyrrole. This one's Pyrrole. No, this is Quinacridone Purple, Perylene Violet, Lunar Violet. It's one of my favorite black colors. I don't think I put it on here because I don't have a ton of it, and I'm probably not going to buy another tube for a while. Rich Green Gold, Emerald Green. This is probably Phthalo Green, Undersea Green, Perylene Green, Quinacridone Gold. This one is Hematite Violet. I don't have it on here because it's I don't have a ton of it in stock. Burnt Sienna, Indian Red, and Brown Iron Oxide. So those are the ones that are just, this is kind of everything. And all of my palettes over here are some sort of version of these, but this is pretty much everything. If I'm using this palette, there's not something I'm like, oh, where is this? But it could come up. But I'm pretty sure it's, there's no yellow ochre in here. I could fit them all in there. Okay, the next thing I wanted to cover, because I'm kind of covering a little bit, bouncing here and there. The next thing I wanted to cover are some of the basic techniques. So if you are a watercolor artist and or you have been playing with watercolors for a while, you're not going to need to watch this video at all. Sorry, I'm moving my stool. But I wanted to have this here as a resource if you're just like, oh goodness, I want to try this watercolor, I want to get into my sketchbook, but I actually have no skills to build upon to begin with. And I was trying to cover as many of those in some of our swatching and other beginning lessons. But I think I kind of missed a few things, and I want to go over them now. And one of them was, and these are based on your questions. So I'm really thankful that you're reaching out and asking questions. Because it's really helpful for me to see where there might be some gaps. So one of the things, of course, you always want to start with water, and having 2 containers. It can just be old jars. These are old yogurt jars repurposed for this. Is that like if I've got my paintbrush in here and I'm switching colors from a red, or let's start with a blue, and I've painted with a blue, and then I want to switch to a pink or a red, but I don't want to put my brush directly in there, and I get this water dirty, I can make sure I'm picking up clean water over there. So I have one that is more clean than the other, so I can always kind of come over and get something more fresh, so that I'm not muddying up my paint too much. It's important to remember that watercolor is basically adding water to pigment. So these are pigment particles. They're dried on my palette. So I add water to it, and then that makes it paint. It makes it fluid. But essentially, when I'm going into this water, I'm putting paint into the water. I'm putting these pigment particles back into the water. So if this starts to get brown, and I'm just cleaning my brush in brown water, and then I'm using that dirty water to pick up a color, I am essentially adding the brown paint into my next color. So everything's just going to get muddier faster. So that is why it's nice to have one that you designate. This is the first drop off point. I drop off most of the paint in here, and then I come over here, freshen off the brush, and can continue working that way, and keep myself from having to refresh the water constantly. and then just being able to work with your water a lot longer. You'll probably see in my videos that I use this a lot. This is just something that's I really like having personally because I'm a full-time artist and this is not necessary for anybody. For a long time I've worked with 2 jars. I just prefer when I go to refill my water just to take one thing, and I have 3, which takes up a lot less space than this. Like this kind of takes up the same amount of space as this little thing. So for me, it was more about space and kind of being able to work as efficiently as possible. So that's what that's about. Another thing is working with your paper. So a couple things. Every paper that you're going to use is going to have a limit to it. So even if you're using the nicest 100% cotton paper and it's really great quality, if you overwork it, it's going to have a limit, and it's going to begin to peel up at some point. So one of the things that is going to get it to that level sooner is being heavy-handed with your pencil and then going in and erasing really hard. This, every time you do this, it is affecting the important, let's just call it kind of the skin or the finish of the paper, and it is taking away some of the life of a paper. So I've erased right there, and I'm coming and I'm painting over that. But, I'm kind of like, oh, I don't like this color. And so I'm trying to adjust it, and I just keep kind of playing on that section. I keep adding more color in while it's wet. I'm just sort of really brushing kind of vigorously. And that paper is going to eventually start to kind of feel gritty. You're going to see it sort of peel up. You're going to see it do some things that are not ideal and they're not beautiful. So the key is when we put down color, we really don't try to fiddle with it too much. When we're doing kind of our color mixes like this, you really don't want to add too much. I've got a little bit of fuzz there, too much pressure. And if you want to adjust this color more or less, I will usually just kind of drop some paint into it. And that's a little more of a gentle way to kind of adjust it while it's still wet, or I wait until it's dried and then I can come back and add another layer, like a glaze over it. So I just need to be cognizant of, am I doing too much in this one spot? I just need to let it go. I need to move on and just let it be. So that is really important to kind of always think about. Am I overworking the paper? Am I being too heavy with the water? Have I erased too much? Those are the things that are gonna deteriorate the paper more quickly. And this right here, I'm using, this is the visual journal paper that I'm on, which is one of the more economical papers. And, I'm still getting pretty decent. I wasn't able to lift that paper up even. I just get nervous. I don't like to do it even if I'm trying to. It really takes a lot of working. And the truth is, with any batch of paper, I've had even really nice cotton paper. Every once in a while, there's a bad batch. Or the sizing, which is basically kind of like a gelatin that they put in the paper. I've talked about it in some other videos. Sometimes it's just not even, or there are going to be sections and spots where, the paper just does something uncharacteristic, kind of outside of its norm, and it's just going to happen every once in a while. So that is my recommendation about paper and how to work on it and get the most out of it without ruining your surface. Another thing is our water to paint ratio. I've been trying to talk about this from the beginning. It just really is important to make sure that if I've got a lot of water here and I only have this small section to cover, I don't want to take this much paint to cover that much of my paper. So you'll see me on my palette kind of do like this, and that's just making sure I take off excess paint. So you see I've dripped it right there. So I don't need all of that to go here, so that I can get a more even, less puddled up um, section of color. So if I do get too much down, you can make your brush thirsty, so dry off your brush, and then it just comes and it sucks up that water and the excess paint there. If I want this darker, then you want to make sure that there's less water in the mix over here. So if I want this darker, I'm not adding more water, I'm just picking up more paint, and then I'm able to fill that in without having it bubble up too much. So I'll make my brush thirsty again. I'll dry it off, and then I can just pick up a little bit if I need to. But like a little bit like that is going to dry. Buckling is another thing. So you can see how my paint is pooling here. See how it's kind of creating a puddle. It's because my paper is buckling. So I really only think that the buckling is a big problem when it does cause the paint to pool and to move towards those divots. So for me, like if my sketchbook gets a little bit buckled and the pages aren't laying completely flat, that doesn't bother me as much as it does for some people. Some people really want to be able to keep your papers nice and flat and crisp. Using clips on the edges is a good way to kind of help hold the paper in place and keep it from doing too much buckling, but you're not really going to be able to prevent all buckling. And some papers are going to help handle it better than others, but the big portion of it is this amount of water here. So I did probably get too much water on that section. And if I was going for a darker green like that, like I said, it's more about getting more saturation on my brush instead of water. So using a damp brush and not a wet brush. See, I didn't dip it back in the water. I still knew that my brush was still slightly damp enough to just pick up paint. And see how I'm just adding color here without adding a pool of water. So getting used to those sorts of like finding the right ratio, how to not add too much water, how to make sure you're getting more pigment down, or if you're getting a more watered down effect, if you want it nice and light, how to do that without adding too much water as well. So it's like you want this to be watery, but you don't want it to pool. So it's like getting those nice mixes. And that's just really comes from playing in our sketchbooks. And we are going to be doing that with each and every page. See, I did overwork that spot. See how it kind of gets hairy. I think that's the best way to put it, is when your paper sort of gets hairy. It gets like, it's gross. It's really kind of gross. I saw a really great technique for fixing that, which I can't do while it's wet. Oops, that was wet too. But I did see someone show a way of combating that with like a scrap piece of paper. It can even be just like a, well, the only piece of paper I have within reach right here is like a Post-it note. So I'm just going to use that, but with the sticky side up, because I don't want to add stickiness to my paper. But to put something like, ooh, I've got paint all over the place. Something like that. Like if this was looking hairy, I could put this down on it, and then you can take maybe the back side, something that's kind of blunt looking and it's not too pointy. You can kind of like push back down on that paper and sort of get it to you don't want it to be pointy, you want it to be more rounded, maybe like the end of this brush, but kind of like reformulate that paper a little bit. So I think that would work here too. Not that I want to paint over it again, but just to kind of get it looking better. that could be a technique that might work well for you, is to kind of just, what's the word for that? Banish? No, I can't remember. I don't know the word for that. But yeah, you can do that as another option. Another thing I want to really say, I prefer using like little jars like this, or like this little thing, because it's very shallow and it is going to keep you from doing this, which I think is one of the worst things in the world to do for your brush, especially since we're using watercolor. Even if you have paint all over this brush, it is better to leave it out just sitting like that than to leave it in the water like this. That is so horrible for the brushes, because it's going to push on the side or it's going to push on the bottom. And then these really nice straight bristles that are so useful for us are going to get bent over like this, and really almost impossible to get them back, or it's just really frustrating to get them back to looking nice and pristine. So leave your brush out, set it on your table. If it's wet, if it has paint on it, like if this has watercolor paint all over it, the beauty of it is, look at this. So all this is dried paint, and I add water to it and it just becomes paint again. So imagine all this is paint in the brush. It's still shaped like the brush, like I want it to be. If I let that dry and I come back next week and I pick up this brush and it's got all this paint on it, all I have to do is put it in water like this for like 2 seconds and we are back into business. So please do that. Please don't leave your brush in a cup. Even if it's a tall cup, it's worse. Some other reasons why, not just like bending the bristles, it'll also get water seeping up into this ferrule, and then that's going to cause it to kind of expand and contract, and then that's when bristles might start falling out. That's when this wooden handle can start to receive more moisture, and then you just really are talking about compromising the quality of your brush. Even if you got a cheap brush, keep it nice and pristine. You know, the better we take care of things, the longer they last, and the longer they last, you know, the less we have to buy new things. And that's one of the key principles to just being a good steward in our world today. So this is one of my favorite brushes, and I will never ever put it in the water like that. You just kind of think of it, let it visit the water, and then leave. And that's what I do. That's what I like to do. So that's my lesson for today for the beginners.